Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us to learn about wireless risks and safer technology solutions. We are recording this session, and everybody who registered, whether they're with us here at this time or wanted to just put a placeholder in, we will send out the recording tomorrow along with all of my slides. And so when you get those, feel free to do the deeper dive into the facts that we're going to share in my slide presentation. And also feel free to share with others, because it's awfully hard to carry on this conversation without something tangible to show people that, yes, indeed, there is a lot to this issue that we just are not allowed to be aware of in typical mainstream media outlets. So with that, I would like to also welcome our guest co-host tonight from New Mexico. We have with us Kevin Lorenzen and Arlene Sanchez. And I know Arlene is electromagnetically sensitive and can't be near a computer. And so she has joined us by telephone tonight, and her husband, Kevin, will be helping to co-host behind the scenes with me tonight. After we do a presentation, we will go ahead and open it up and answer questions that you may drop into the chat throughout. We ask that the chat not be terribly active, going back and forth, because otherwise we're not all able to focus on what's being presented in the forum tonight. So drop questions in the chat as they come up. And at the end, if you have additional questions, we'll open it up for Q&A. And this will be about a 2-hour segment tonight, so please stay with us. We know at some point it may feel like drinking water out of a fire hose, but hang in there, because we're going to talk about the science, we're going to talk about the risks, and we're also going to talk a lot about solutions and what people are doing in their homes and in their communities to not only have safe technology, but to try and figure out how to help everybody learn about this issue. So with that, I'd like to turn it over for a moment to Kevin and Arlene. I think Kevin may be doing most of the speaking for the next 5 minutes or so, but Arlene is also certainly encouraged to chime in as she sees fit. So Kevin, go ahead and introduce yourselves and teach us how you came to know about the wireless radiation issue.
Sure. So Arlene and I are married, and about 3.5 years ago, Arlene was driving a Lexus automobile that was a hybrid, and there were probably signs already, but we didn't know what we didn't know. But one day she called me. She had pulled over and said, "There is something wrong with this automobile." She goes, "I cannot drive it." She goes, "I get in the car, my brain starts to burn. I feel like I'm having a heart attack. Something is wrong with this automobile." So that kind of made us start looking. And so I picked her up and traded vehicles with her. I had a truck with less tech. We got home and we really started to look on the internet and try to figure out what is causing this type of an issue. She also was starting to have some brain fog and just some memory recollection issues. But again, it's not in the mainstream media, so you don't hear about it. You don't know, this is something I should be worried about. We had previously kind of looked at whether it's a possibility of early onset Alzheimer's, and that wasn't the case. So you start going down a certain path, and fortunately, we had a doctor through some of her early work that kind of put her on to a track that helped us learn about this. But it was really the event in the automobile where we knew something was seriously wrong. And that's what really started our journey. And now it's about 3.5, I guess we're even approaching 4 years later. And Arlene has gotten to the point, she was in the tech industry. I was previous in the tech industry, but she literally had to leave her job because that corporation had every single person on a laptop. So everybody was using laptops. They would go into conference rooms with laptops. Everything was wireless. Everybody had Bluetooth on their keyboards, their mice or mouse, whatever you want to call it. So there was just RF everywhere. Not to mention fluorescent bulbs, right? Everybody was sitting under fluorescent bulbs, so you had the issues with fluorescent lights as well. So she was literally just getting impacted every single second she was at work. They had a large area. She'd go to have her lunch. She'd heat up her lunch. They had 6 microwaves on every single floor, but you'd go in and there'd be a line of people to heat up their lunches, and you would stand there in front of a half a dozen microwaves, all kicking out power for however long it took you to get through the queue and then heat your lunch. So we learned an awful lot, and in the last, well, pretty much in the last year or so, we have started to advocate. And Cece, we are very, very appreciative for you, the work you do, and we're doing everything we can to help at this point.
Well, first, we are all so very sorry that you've even had to have this experience. I know that you guys have done some amazing work in your own home to make it a safe living environment. And I want to thank you and Arlene for being my guest recently at Tech Safe, which is a cable show that I do a couple times a month. And we will make sure that everybody gets the link to that 28-minute program to hear more deeply about the experiences that you guys have had. So thank you so much, Kevin, for speaking on behalf of yourself and your lovely, beautiful wife, Arlene, who the courage just, you guys are my heroes, and I'm so very grateful to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
So I will go ahead and remove the spotlight on you. I'll put it back on me. And I'm going to go ahead and start doing a slide presentation. In just 1 second. Let me get my screen share going here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen now. You can give me a shout if you can't. But again, I will be sending out these slides along with the video from tonight's, I did hit record, along with the video. So I never ever imagined this is what I would be doing for my work, but I'm so grateful that the skill set that I have is conducive to helping people learn about wireless risks. And that MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University, where I also did my undergraduate in communication. So I feel blessed to have this skill set to help people break down this pretty complex issue into ways that hopefully you can easily digest. And like most people, I had no idea there was anything to even think about with wireless technology connections until I was at book group back in 2012, 2013. And a friend of ours who's an engineer tipped us off that there could be biological effects from this new technology that we were all adopting. And I just made a mental note of it. And then not long after that, when I was the grant coordinator for our school district, somehow I came across the fact that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, these are the doctors who get the conundrum cases that other doctors haven't been trained in, oftentimes because of things that have been brought into the environment that are toxic. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine put out a position statement more than a decade ago, warning school superintendents not to allow wireless into the classroom because of the biological risks. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, maybe I need to really look at this, because I had spent 8 years doing campaigns for now I see it was the wireless industry's 21st century classroom campaign, with the goal of getting a one-to-one device in the hands of every child. They know from a marketing perspective, once you have a child as a consumer, you often get to keep them for life. So it's a brilliant marketing strategy if it weren't so very harmful, and especially to children whose bodies are still developing. So I started doing the deep dive. I found videos and lectures online that led me to the peer-reviewed, non-industry funded science. And we're going to walk you through the science today as well. But at the end of the day, after I started this difficult conversation with my schools, because they had all bought into all of this, got to have this new technology mindset that we were being given, we actually became the first public school district in the United States to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with baby steps of precaution. Turn off these devices when not in use, because otherwise we just leave everything laying around pulsating radiation all the time. Turn the Wi-Fi on only when needed. The wireless access points, the routers. Always place the mobile device on a solid surface, and we're going to walk you through the legal fine print in just a minute. And when I was a little kid, my mom always said, don't stand in front of the TV. And so we know that we should be at least a foot away from these screens, because they have, just in the screen technology itself, without even the radio frequency radiation, they have an electric and magnetic field that can also overpower our own body's natural electromagnetic field. So that was a good step in the right direction when we became the first in the nation to do that. But then I realized it was just a sign in our classrooms. They weren't actually following this protocol and protecting the kids. So I went to my state senator, whom I had worked alongside doing all these campaigns for our local education foundation. And I showed her the science, and I showed her the radiation coming from our devices, and I showed her our little, sign, and I said, I don't know what to do here. This is like smoking or drugs or alcohol or pornography. Adults will make their choices, but aren't we morally obliged to protect our collective children? So Senator Spilka, who today is our Senate president here in Massachusetts, she put me together with an attorney in her office, and he and I whittled out a very simple bill back in 2014 that would pull together the right minds at the state level and form a commission to do the deep dive into this. And then once they better understand the facts, decide what we're going to do about it. So we introduced that bill a decade ago. And because I have had the just sheer privilege of connecting to world-leading scientists and doctors and others whose life's work is investigating this kind of man-made radiation, I, being a tech writer, created a simple template and said, hey, if you could take a moment, would you please send in testimony to the Massachusetts legislature to teach them what we need to be learning about this new technology? And I also was able to connect with a lot of citizens around the US, like, Arlene and Kevin today. Back then, we were connecting with others who a decade ago had already learned enough to know that it was these radiation exposures that were harming them. So we got a whole body of evidence entered into the public record in Massachusetts. And I had never done any of this legislative work before. So I was completely, going by instinct here. And some people would pull me aside and say, yeah, good luck to you. Bills never go anywhere the first session that they're introduced in Massachusetts. And others would pull me aside and say, well, that bill came in under your name. If it's not sponsored by a legislator, then good luck to you. And I went, okay, but I've taken it all the way through my schools. I've taken it through my town, and I don't know what else to do. And because we got enough information in, the Joint Committee on Public Health actually reported our bill out favorably that first session. And I was patted on the back and congratulated. And I was like, yeah, but what happens now? And they said, well, it goes into another committee now. And we have a 2-year legislative session here in Massachusetts. And so it did go to another committee, but that committee didn't do anything with the bill, and it expired at the end of the 2-year session. So we brought it back the following session, and then all these other bills started showing up. One to address Wi-Fi in schools, that was initiated by a family whose son got very, very sick from the wireless in the schools. There were other bills talking about utility smart meters, and we're going to teach you a bit about that tonight. But at one point, we had 20 different bills in Massachusetts to address this issue. And we still have bills in Massachusetts that have never gotten enacted into law. But by big blessings, we had these same conversations with legislators in New Hampshire, and in 7 months' time, now we've been waiting 10 years in Massachusetts for meaningful action. In 7 months' time, we got a bill passed into law in New Hampshire to investigate the health and environmental impacts of wireless radiation. So we'll walk you through that legislation too and show you the groundbreaking report that they issued, which is a great resource to share with others in our own community. So we continue to do the legislative work. We continue to do education like we're doing today. And then there is this incredible leading scientist in our country by the name of Dr. Deborah Davis, and she is the founder of the Environmental Health Trust and a Nobel laureate on climate change. She was part of that team that won the Nobel Prize for climate change. And somebody in Europe had reached out to her. They were starting to build an online course to train the masses quickly on this issue. And they reached out to Dr. Deborah Davis and said, hey, may we have your permission to reference your wonderful database at the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's largest think tank and database on this issue. And she said, absolutely. And you might want to speak to this woman here in Massachusetts, Cece Doucette. She's making some inroads with the schools and with her legislature. So I was put in touch with them, and that was back in 2016. And I connected with Dr. Mikko Ahonen, who's one of the world's leading scientists out of Finland, and this couple out of the UK, Brett and Lynn West. And we all were able to clear our schedules for like 3 months and hit it hard and really come up with a course that we're about to relaunch. We're going to shift the name from wireless education because we don't want to put a spotlight on wireless. We would rather put a spotlight on safe technology. And then we are rebranding, and we're going to call ourselves now Safer Tech Education, and we'll let you guys know when we launch that in the coming weeks. So we have so many incredible resources available today that we didn't have a decade ago. In my journey for the first 2 years, I didn't have anybody I could talk to about this issue. I was completely self-taught and going by the incredible peer-reviewed science that I was reading. So it was really gratifying when somebody contacted me, Patricia Burke, who's here in Massachusetts, to say there was a panel of world-leading experts coming to the Massachusetts State House to ask for right-to-know legislation. And when I got off the phone that day, I felt like a kid in a candy store because, wow, somebody found me, found my work, contacted me, and now I get to go to the State House. And I went into a standing room only forum with people all over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who knew about this issue or who were there to learn about it from the legislature. And so Dr. Deborah Davis brought this expert panel in, and she brought with her Frank Clegg, who was the retiring president of Microsoft Canada. And I'm sitting there going, wow, there's a captain of industry who knows about this issue. And Mr. Clegg was retiring, and some of the scientists met him at his home and showed him, gave measurements and the science and showed him what this technology was. And as it turns out, he had loved ones who were already suffering from wireless radiation. This helped them to sort it out. So Mr. Clegg met with a dozen of the world's leading scientists and came back and said, our Federal Communications Commission public radiation limits here in the United States are not safe. Same goes for Safety Code 6 up in Canada. These are not safe and protective of public health. And Dr. Davis also brought with her Dr. Sharma from India, and he worked for the Indian government. And India's public radiation exposure limits were set way up here where ours still are today. And Dr. Sharma has done some of the research on sperm and fertility that show the limits way up here are only based on heat. How much heat from a single device would it take to raise the temperature of the skin? But when you look at the sperm studies and other body studies, they show biological effects at hundreds of thousands of times below that heat threshold. So non-thermal effects. You don't have to have heat to have harm. So Dr. Sharma flew in on his vacation time to present at this forum at our State House. And we also had Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair, who's a child psychologist, and she lectures all over the world about the effects of excessive screen time. And she wrote a book called The Big Disconnect, which I went out and bought the next day and read cover to cover. She takes it through every stage of childhood development, from the wee little kids up through high school, and what all this excessive screen time is doing to impair proper brain development. She'll tell us that kids should be outside, running around, playing with each other, in the environment, out in nature, getting that good healing energy from the earth. They should be connecting with their peers. They should be connecting meaningfully with loving adults in their lives. They should be immersed in physical touch and in movement. And they should be out there under the rhododendron in imaginary play, going deeper and deeper levels into their imagination, which helps to form the brain and build all those beautiful synapses. And we have done a huge disservice by allowing the industry to replace real life interactions with excessive screen time. So the pendulum swung way out with all Wi-Fi all the time. And now we know enough to teach how to bring it back to have a life balance with technology for whatever we think we actually need it for, and all the other amazing parts of our life that we need to stop neglecting and put front and center again. So when I went down to the State House for this forum that they had, I was beginning to connect now with other people. And over the coming months, we started connecting with one another outside of this forum. And eventually I formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And we built this website that will allow you to go in and do lots of research on your own, lots of resources to help you. And we try to make it, not dark and scary, but full of light and encouragement and hope, because without hope, we don't have a whole lot left. And there is so much that we can do that we do have direct control over. And we'll teach you a lot about that today too. So somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked if I would co-chair the technology panel for the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference. And I was so honored to do so. And Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada flew in on his own time and dime to present with us. Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, who's one of the world's leading scientists on this, came to tell us exactly what the known mechanisms of harm are, because for years the industry spun it like, oh, there's no mechanism of biological harm identified. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, now we know at least 8 different mechanisms of harm, and we're going to walk you through that tonight too. We also had with us Peter Sullivan, and I found Peter's work through a lecture online, and he was lecturing with the autism community to say there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom's bloodline, it didn't come from dad's background, it came from somewhere in the environment. And when you begin to remove the environmental exposures, we often see incredible, what some would call miraculous, recovery or improvements in autism spectrum disorders. So there's a Dr. Toril Gelter out of Walnut Creek, California, and she has a protocol where she has her families do a digital detox for 12 hours a night, where you turn all the wireless off at home and you create a sleep sanctuary. And she has so many families who have seen these incredible recoveries. She was talking about one little boy who had been nonverbal his entire life. And after just a short time of doing this digital detox at night, this little boy turned over to his mother and said, Mom, can you hand me I think it was the scissors or something. And the boy and his mother both just kind of went, wow, because they had never heard his voice before. But you give the body the opportunity to heal and remove all these exposures. And we don't want to overpromise, because every single one of us is very different biologically. But when we remove these exposures and give the body a clean, healthy, healing environment, we see incredible things happen. We also had Theodora Scarrato, who is Dr. Deborah Davis's executive director over at the Environmental Health Trust. And she came to teach us what other countries are already doing, because we are way behind the 8 ball in America and North America, because a lot of the manufacturers are here. And as we'll see a little bit later on, they own our mainstream media, so we don't get the real science when it comes out. So I like to share this link because we were held to 10 minutes or less in each one of our talks. So if you want to hand somebody a link to a very highly credible, because it is at the National Institutes of Health, set of presentations, feel free to share this link. Now, one of the major gaps we had back a decade ago when I fell down the rabbit hole is that we could see that so many children and adults were getting sick, but we had no way to train their healthcare teams or even to train them to understand how to recognize these symptoms. And so we're so very grateful that we've now had 2 major EMF medical conferences. So let's just take a moment to talk about the alphabet soup that we'll hear. So this technology started back in the World War II era when, Raytheon and others were developing microwave technology for warfare, and that's where this technology hails from. So sometimes it's called microwave sickness, radar sickness. That's what it was used for during, wartime. And now it's being coined in other countries as electro-hypersensitivity. Here in the United States, as we'll see, the Americans with Disabilities Act calls it electromagnetic sensitivity. So it's these pulsations of radio frequency microwave radiation that create these spiked erratic pulses of electromagnetic fields in our environment. So when we see EMF, that's what we're talking about, these electromagnetic fields of man-made radiation. So we had our last conference in 2021, and the entire conference offered 24.5 continuing medical education credits, and those were good up through July of 2023. Once the accreditation period expired, the executive director, Elizabeth Kelly, took the entire conference, more than 60 videos, and put it online at no charge for you and your healthcare team and your emergency responders in your town to go get this training for free. And the lectures might start at 20 minutes, might go on up to an hour. So they're very easily slotted into your calendar. You could sit there for 4 days and take the whole conference, or you can spread it out and digest a little bit and then come back for some more. But please know we have all the resources we need today to address this situation head on. So that's my story and how I got involved in this issue. And I want to walk you through now how my schools became the first in the nation to even have our little sign of precautionary measures hanging in our classrooms. Anybody listening with us who has an iPhone, I invite you to take it out right now and go into settings. And it's not just in the iPhone, but I know exactly where to find it in the iPhone. For any of our devices, you can look up RF for radio frequency, look up RF exposure on the make and model of your phone or your laptop or your tablet or whatever you're using. And you will find the legal fine print that we're going to walk you through right now. Our friends at the Environmental Health Trust also have a web page dedicated to showing the fine print. For example, the Apple iPads used to have a disclaimer in it that says things like this can cause seizures and blackouts and eye strain. And I personally know of 2 families in neighboring towns whose children had their first seizures while using a tablet with all these radiating antennas coming at them. So in the iPhone, from settings, scroll down just a little ways and hit general. From general, go all the way down to legal and regulatory. From legal and regulatory, about 4 down from the top, you will see RF exposure. Again, this is that radio frequency microwave radiation that the industry politely calls energy because it is a man-made energy form. When we read that legal fine print, it tells us 2 pretty important things. One, this device was tested at a distance away from the body. So if you're holding it, if you're tucking it in your bra, if you're putting it in your yoga pants, if you're putting it in your back pocket, your suit pocket or shirt pocket, you are exceeding the Federal Communications public radiation exposure limits. And as we'll see in a moment, those were never tested for biological safety. So you read a little further down and they say, but hey, if you want to reduce your exposure, basically don't touch a radiating device. They say to reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option, like speakerphone, like a headset. And I'm going to stop my screen share momentarily to give you a couple of demonstrations. So take heart that everything we have broken, we know how to fix. So one of the properties of this microwave radiation is it amplifies around metal. So if you were given a regular wire headset with your device and you plug that into a radiating phone or tablet, that radiation is going to travel right up the wire, right into your brain. But you can also look for something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And that still has, the little plug that goes into your device. It goes up a nice long wire so you can create some distance away from that radiating device. It's got audio and muting and volume control and all of that here. But look at these 2 little beads. These are something called ferrite beads that break the microwave radiation signal. And then the acoustics go from there into this hollow tube or air tube that you then just hook over your ears and plug into your head. Now notice there's only rubber tips here. I saw one that was purported to be a hollow tube headset, but it had 2 little magnets right here so you could hang it around your neck when you weren't using it. And I thought, well, that's a pretty cool feature. And then I went, wait a minute, magnets going right up to your brain with microwave radiation in the air? That's a bad idea. So you want to keep the metal away from your head as much as you can. So look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And what I want to do now is give a demonstration of this invisible toxin because I had a really hard time getting my head around the fact that they're telling us we're surrounded, but how do we even know? And I was so grateful to know that there are meters that you can purchase. This one is the Safe and Sound Pro 2 broadband radio frequency meter. This is the device that was recommended at the EMF medical conference, and doctors are now purchasing these and putting them into their practice. We have a chiropractor here up on the North Shore in Massachusetts who rents it to her patients for $10. And she says, you have 2 hours. Now go home and do your scavenger hunt. Document where, jot down where all these radiation exposures are coming from, and then come back and I'll teach you how to fix that. So it's critically important to have a meter. And in my home, after I learned what I learned and I stopped circling my tail and I took action to protect my family, I've gotten it down to the flashing green on this meter. And that's the best that we can get. In the scientific literature on the middle number, and I know you can't see it very clearly, but it's called max. What is the maximum spike of radiation that's coming at us? In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less, and the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically, in 3 feet of air, how much radiation is pulsing around us? They want us to be at 10 or less in our sleeping areas, which is what our home should be. Right now, I'm at 2, but I want to give you an example of what happens when you take your phone out of airplane mode. I leave mine in airplane mode as a rule. There's a feature in the phone settings where I can forward any cell phone calls to my landline, landline, good old, how do I show this in my camera? Well, anyway, I've got a phone here. But you can forward your phone calls to that. So that's one quick tip. And then you can go into your settings and turn off the cellular and the data antenna, and turn off the Bluetooth antenna and the Wi-Fi antenna and the locator and the hotspot and the 5G antennas, because each one of those is mounted somewhere different in here. And each one is separately pulsing microwave radiation all the time to say to the nearest cell tower or router, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? I want to connect. I want to keep that connection. So our message today is not no technology, it's safe technology. And we start by scaling back on what we have direct control over, and turning off all those antennas in your settings that you're not using is a critically important step. So with 5G and the Internet of Things, the industry is forecasting that every one of our homes is going to have 200 devices wirelessly connected to the internet. From your stove to your refrigerator to your baby's potty seat to your television, your mouse, your keyboard, your baby monitor, your security system, everything electronic you buy these days, they are pushing to put one or more of these radiating antennas in. So if we don't do something and do it quickly, we're going to find ourselves hitting that tipping point where we're no longer feeling like we feel safe. So I just took my cell phone out of airplane mode, and you can see that these antennas are now coming online. And a moment ago, we were at 2 microwatts per square meter. Now we're flashing in the high end, the red extreme, from one device, just one, with all those antennas cranking. So I'm going to stop exposing myself. I put my phone back in airplane mode, and as the radiation dissipates out of the air, you see it go back down to that nice low area. But it retained the maximum spikes that were coming out of my cell phone. We were at 2. We want to be at 10 or less. My one phone blew the top off of this meter at 3,180,000 microwatts per square meter. That's as high as this meter captures. We may be even higher than that from that one cell phone and all those antennas radiating. We want to be at 10 or less. So when I hit my reset button, look at that. It went back down, and now I'm at 1.7. So I show you this to encourage you that yes, it can be done. And we're going to teach you a lot of nice ways to do that tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and resume my screen share. And you'll see that pop up back in a minute. So again, we're all about solutions, right? We have the little sign to encourage your schools to start looking at this. When I knew there were meters on the market, back in 2016, we had the Acoustimeter. And since then, we've come up with the Safe and Sound Pro 2. They're both excellent meters. They're both in the $400 range. And it took me 3 grant cycles in my town. We had a little pot of money that they distributed out to the community for programs for the citizens of our town. I submitted a grant application saying, can we please get a radio frequency meter, one for our schools and one for our library? Then everybody can go measure. And our select board, which is our form of local government, had no idea what the heck I was talking about. They said, we don't really know about this. Come back next time. 6 months go by, I resubmit my application, and they go, gee, well, this is probably more of a Board of Health issue. And I already knew our Board of Health didn't know about this because I had been in touch with our health director in our town. And he was around back in the 1990s when the telecom industry came in and literally wined and dined our municipal authorities, like took them out to fancy hotels in their banquet halls and sold all the benefits of this new technology with cell towers and all this coming to your town. And if anybody raised their hand and said, gee, what about any potential backside to it? What about biological effects to the people or the environment? And the industry said, oh, we're so sorry. There's nothing you can do about that. It's all within the FCC guidelines, and you can't sue us if there's any harm. Because sure enough, with the Telecom Act of 1996, The industry kind of wrote it, deep pockets, heavy political influence, and put a clause in there, section 704, that basically says, yeah, you can't sue us if there's any environmental harm. So that's how they first rolled in the cell towers. But I said, well, what about Wi-Fi? And he said, gee, I don't know about that. Let me ask our friends up at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. So they reached out to the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and they said, well, we'd like to put out a fact sheet on this, but we're still working on it. And they sent me something that put wireless radiation in the same category as coffee and pickled vegetables as far as harm goes. And I went, oh, I've heard about this. That's industry spin. Because yes, the World Health Organization did determine that this radiation should be at least classified as group 2B, which is a possible human carcinogen. At that time, coffee was being grown with pesticides that were also causing cancers and other harm. And so it was in that 2B category. And as far as pickled vegetables, there were certain Asian vegetables that were being pickled with formaldehyde, and communities that were eating those in quantity were indeed getting cancers. So if you ever hear that coffee and pickled vegetables thing, the industry wants to make you think like, oh, Wi-Fi is fine, coffee and pickled vegetables, when in reality, those were in that same category, and some of that has been cleaned up since. So, well, I got spin back from our Department of Public Health, and so folks, there is no cavalry coming to fix this for us. We are certainly working on it at the state level. We are working on it at the federal level, at the international level, but the industry has deep hooks everywhere. And so as long as they can spin their message and suppress the evidence of harm from coming out in the media, most people don't know. So that's why we do the trainings that we do, so that you can learn, get comfortable enough to start talking to other people, and then we can help educate in your towns and show you what you need to do to get your own local zoning bylaws strong enough that they can't just stick a cell tower right outside your bedroom. So it took me 3 grant cycles. I had to educate every member of our select board individually. By this time, I had a bill with the Massachusetts legislature, and I had been up at the State House educating every legislative office that had a hand on one of these bills. One by one by one, I was educating. And I realized nobody knows about this. So I had to double back to my town, and I started meeting with my town leaders. And then I resubmitted my application after I'd shown them all the harm from their own devices. And they gave me approval for 1 meter to put in the library for starters, on the condition that our library trustees would allow it to come into circulation. So then I had to go present to the library trustees, and there were 4 or 5 of them. And one gentleman sat there with his arms crossed the whole time, and you could just see he had hogwash written all over his forehead. And another one was real keen on the idea and said, wow, I can't wait to get that meter. I want to take it home and see what it can do. And then a third one said, look, regardless of how we feel personally, as a library, we are a conduit of information in our community. And so if this device will help to get information out to the community, I think we should take a vote. And my library voted 4-1 to put this acoustimeter on loan. And it has now been in circulation since 2016. And we were the first in the nation to do that. And others around the country are now doing it. And it's much easier today to make this request, because libraries are having to reinvent themselves because people don't necessarily read books anymore. So most of our libraries now have what they call a library of things. And I got the idea for this because when the energy industry came in and replaced all of our healthier incandescent light bulbs with these new CFL light bulbs, they put a kilowatt meter on loan in our libraries in a nice little case that got barcoded, thinking that you could take that home, measure your incandescent light bulb to see how much energy you use, and then use one of the fluorescent light bulbs and see how much money you're going to save, and say, wow, I'm going to adopt all this new fluorescent and LED technology and save some money. What they didn't tell us then is that also creates another man-made electromagnetic field with dirty electricity that can be very hard on us biologically. Some people will recognize they have never felt good under fluorescent lights. So our body tells us, but we don't have enough information to listen. So feel free to go to your own library. There are many across the country who've already done this. We can give you some examples. And if your library doesn't have the $400 to get a good meter like this, and I emphasize get a good meter because we found out recently that a couple of local libraries in Massachusetts have another one that costed maybe $100. And we tested the two side by side, and there were a lot of signals that that lesser meter was not picking up. So people might think they're safe, but they're actually still in a very dangerous field of electromagnetic radiation. So if your library can spring for the $400 to get one of these meters, I would say go for the Safe and Sound Pro 2. It just has some additional features beyond the acoustimeter, which is still a fine meter. And if you cannot get the funding directly from your library, if your librarian reaches out to the Environmental Health Trust, they have a small grant fund and may be able to help you get that meter into your library, but it has to be an actual librarian who contacts them. One of the last bastions of independent reporting in our communities is our cable stations. They will often be tickled to have a citizen approach them and say, hey, I have an idea for a program. Will you help me out? You could bring me in by Zoom, or if you live locally, I'd be happy to come to your station. And we can do an educational episode that will run in your community on cable. And then you've got a video that's local that you can then share in other ways. My cable station has been so great. They actually sent somebody to my home with a professional camera, and we walked through and showed common exposures from the microwave oven, from the decked cordless phone, from the router, from the smart meter, you know, all of what is around our homes today. And then we made suggestions for how you might choose to use that technology differently. And then I was also brought in as a guest at the Worcester, Massachusetts cable station, WCCA, a couple of times because National Grid piloted their smart grid utility electric meter program out there, which is not smart at all. And we'll tell you about that. And the station manager reached out to me and said, Cece, we want you to have your own program. So tomorrow we're going to be filming episode 38 with Brenda out of Fiber First Los Angeles. And so we do these half-hour programs every couple of weeks, and we've done 37 so far. Episode 37 was our co-host tonight, Arlene and Kevin out of New Mexico. And we do it to get people's stories out there, and we do it to hear directly from the scientists and directly from the doctors, so that we always have a highly credible flow of information so you can keep this conversation in front of people all the time. So please join us for these half-hour episodes here. And now we're going to start looking at the science. We'll look at the long-term effects, and then we'll look at the short-term effects that many people are experiencing. And again, for the longest time, the industry got away with this by saying, oh, there's no biological mechanism of harm identified in the science. But they can't say that truthfully anymore. Child and adult cancers. So the gold standard research group in the world is the United States National Toxicology Program, which is part of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. And 2 decades ago, they were told by the Food and Drug Administration to do a study on cell phones. Now, 20 years ago, we were looking at 2G and 3G, which is second and third generation. We tend to get a new generation of cellular telecommunications about every 10 years. So they started doing this study expecting that they were going to prove that cell phones were safe. 20 years later, they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review of their studies. It was a whole series of studies that they did. And at the end of the day, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, among other harms. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories that they can assign. That should have triggered public policy to protect you and I. And we'll tell you in a minute why that didn't. So we know conclusively that this causes cancer and DNA damage. Now, the industry will get a hold of a good study like this and say, oh, that's just one study. You need more than one study to prove anything. Well, right on the heels of our $30 million cell phone study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy concluded another multi-year, multi-million-dollar study on cell towers, the base station. So now we've got this end of it and this end of it and all the radiation going in between. And guess what? Italy found the same thing that we did with cancers and DNA damage and more. So we don't need more science. What we need is an informed public that's going to get informed enough to speak up and not let this go on any further. So DNA, we know, is the roadmap to grow a proper anything from a human to a plant, a pollinator, a tree, and anything else that has living cells in it. It was the infertility studies that actually got me on my feet when I started reading them. They have taken male human sperm, exposed it to the antennas in a laptop, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure. And I went, you got to be kidding me. We had just sent our oldest daughter up to college with her MacBook, which she, of course, was using right on top of her reproductive organs. And our youngest daughter had just gone into high school, a decade ago. And we thought we'd give her a leg up. So for Christmas, we gave her a laptop that year. And where was she using it? But right on top of her reproductive organs. So as a mom, that was the day I found my voice on this issue and went, holy smokes, I can't let this happen. So now we have, repeated sperm studies. We now have infertility studies on women. Kaiser Permanente put out an incredibly well done study that has never been refuted about women who are using wireless technology having higher miscarriage rates. So this is so very serious. And then neurotoxicity. So even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we were already at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression and seeing suicidal ideation like we've never seen before, even among children. And now we have studies on this neurotoxicity. Dr. Hugh Taylor at Yale Medical heads up the OBGYN program at Yale, and he has done rodent studies where they expose the pregnant mice to the radiation from a cell phone for about 9 hours a day, off and on. And when those pups were born, they exhibited behavior that looked a lot like a child with attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, literally bouncing off the walls of the cage like not a care in the world because they had lost their ability to focus. Dr. Martha Herbert is a Harvard pediatric neurologist who founded the autism lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's now retired, but still very active in the community. And she saw that families with members on the autism spectrum would hit a tipping point because they became so neurotoxic that then they started exhibiting all of these autism symptoms. And she knows there is a huge connection between what she sees in the families in her care and what we know biologically happens through the science with microwave radiation exposures. And again, when we can remove these exposures, so many people see beautiful inroads toward recovery in very short amounts of time when the body is given the opportunity to heal. Alzheimer's. So Dr. Martin Pall, who we mentioned earlier, culled the science around Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's used to hit after 25 years to people in their 80s or 90s. And then it started happening in our 70s, our 60s, our 50s, our 40s, our 30s, and even in some cases in our 20s. We cannot continue to pollute the environment of the brain with microwaves and expect that we're going to be the type of humans that we were before we introduced this a couple decades ago. So we mentioned that this gets embargoed in mainstream media, and we're so very grateful when well-known environmental groups like the Environmental Working Group get funding to start putting professionals on this issue. EWG now has a PhD who focuses in this area, and they have come out with some really good fact sheets. So know your audience. A lot of people are familiar with the Environmental Working Group because every year they put out what they call their Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen list regarding pesticides in our food stream. So sometimes if people already know about their pesticide fact sheets, they might be willing to listen to what they know about the wireless radiation issue. So they have put out a bunch of different fact sheets. Here's two of them: protecting kids from wireless radiation in school and at home. And here's another one about the neurotoxicity with the nervous system. So here's a link you can get to these two and more. And then, folks, we have to know that children are not just little adults. Everything in their body is still under development. Their central nervous system, their immune system, their DNA is still forming, and this can damage all of that. Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues did the modeling that we see here to show the penetration of microwaves into the brain. So all these head models are turned sideways, and the little yellow is the ear. When an adult with a fully formed skull and brain puts that cell phone up to the head, you're getting microwaved about a third of the way into the brain. On a 10-year-old child, it's going in about 3/4 of the way. And on a 5-year-old child, it's going almost into the entire brain. And their skulls are thinner because they're still forming, and children have a higher water content in their brain. And we know, just like if you put a cup of coffee in the microwave, it's all those molecules exacerbating and heating up and causing your coffee to heat up. But when you put it up to the brain, it's causing all sorts of other effects. So we've really got to step up our game here and start protecting the children. So those are some of the long-term effects. In the short term, we know a lot more today than we did even a decade ago. 2 decades ago, there are experts like Elizabeth Kelly who put together that EMF medical conference. She was working with the Americans with Disabilities Act long ago, and the Jobs Area Network and the Indoor Environmental Quality Groups. And they've had stuff on their website for 2 decades with recommended accommodations for electromagnetic illnesses. So they name it. So it's not like we haven't known. It's just that industry keeps blocking it from the public. So let's talk about symptoms that people are experiencing today that they can do a lot about. So one of the biggest things today is that people don't sleep right. And not only adults, but children. And when I was growing up, sleep is what adolescents, teenagers, and children did best, right? We couldn't get enough sleep. And now we have kids who can't sleep because these microwaves are pulsating all the time. And what we now know as a mechanism of harm has to do with melatonin. So we are light beings. We operate off of that 24-hour circadian rhythm, which operates off of lightness and darkness. And in the wee hours of darkness during sleep, our brain is meant to release melatonin from the pineal gland. And that's about as scientific as I'll get. But melatonin is supposed to be released while we're sleeping to go in to regulate our sleep and help the body to do the cell repair and cleanup and discharge all of the, the garbage from our body while we sleep out through the bloodstream. What the science is showing is that the brain cannot differentiate between natural daylight and this light energy form of microwaves that we're now immersed in. So the brain's over there going, okay, guys, when's it going to get dark so I can release the melatonin? And until we learn to turn these signals off during our sleep hours, we may hit a tipping point because the body only has so much energy with which to do cell repair and regeneration, and our immune system can only handle so much. And if we get this domino effect going on with all this damage going on and we're impairing our body's cleanup mechanism, Then we start tipping into things like insomnia, headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines that our doctors can't figure out, nosebleeds and ear bleeds. Ask any school teacher who's been there for 30 years, ask them how many boxes of tissues they used to go through in a school year versus how many they're going through right now from nosebleeds, nausea, dizziness. All of this is there and it's happening, but nobody knows why. Fatigue, pain from unidentified sources. So we know about cancer, we know about infertility, we know about neurotoxicity. One of the things that the science is showing us with the neurotoxicity is that we have some protective measures built into our body. One of them is the blood-brain barrier. It's a membrane around our brain that protects the brain from toxins as they're going through the body to get discarded from going into the brain. That blood-brain barrier gets disrupted by microwave radiation and it opens up or breaks that blood-brain barrier. So now when the toxins are supposed to be escorted out of the brain, they can take a left turn and go into the brain now, which explains why we have so much neurotoxicity today, because we are disabling our brain's ability to protect us. And then there's another mechanism of harm called rouleau formation. In my little brain, rouleau sounds a lot like Rolos, which were those stacked chocolate caramels, the Rolos that I used to love before I had to give up junk food. So our red blood cells are meant to be these nice round or oval blood cells that are circulating free form and bringing oxygen up to all of our organs and tissues to keep us humming along quite nicely. When we expose the red blood cells to electromagnetic fields, it causes them to glom together, to magnetize. And now they're forming these gloms of chains that can't get to where they need to go to bring oxygen. And so we have this rouleau formation that you can see under a microscope, that those nicely formed red blood cells are now looking like bottle caps and sticking together, and they're not bringing oxygen. So now we have oxidative stress as a mechanism of harm. And as your doctors will tell you, oxidative stress is a precursor to most chronic illnesses. So we've gotten a lot smarter about this over the years. And another mechanism of harm is our skin has little antennas all over the surface of our skin. Every living thing has these systems built in to help us navigate. So we as humans have these little antennas in the surface of our skin that will warn us if we're getting too hot or too cold and tell us to go do something about that, right? So when we overpower ourselves with microwave radiation, the way that that shows up is we have a lot of people who talk about the hot ear when they put a cell phone up to their ear. We have people talk about this burning feeling, rashes, tingling in the skin, nerve damage. People who carry cell phones in their pocket, their nerves in their leg might start going jiggity. So our body's trying to talk to us, but we need to know how to listen. And then our heart, our lungs, our brain, these are major electrical organs in our body. That's why we do EEGs and EKGs, to measure those electrical signals that normally should be happening in our body. When we overpower that natural signaling with microwaves, it starts sending everything haywire. And one of the things that happens is we have something that's called voltage-gated calcium channels. So as our cells are whispering to each other all day long, we have these little calcium channels that open and close to those electrical impulses. And when we get these bombardments of microwaves coming at us, it dysregulates that. And then the gates aren't opening and closing properly, and we get an influx of calcium going outside of the cell, and it's causing this triggered thing that happens where we start getting this downstream effect. And then all of a sudden, it might be your brain, it might be your heart, it might be your breast, you're developing cancers or other symptoms because we've got this excess of calcium that's causing this chemical reaction that creates this really nasty free radical called peroxynitrite. And that then will go in and kind of feed off of your weakest proclivity in your body. So we know so many mechanisms of harm today, but we need your help in getting this information out there. So here's the cognitive impairment, the anger, the behavior issues, the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. Folks, it's heartbreaking to listen to the lectures at that EMF medical conference and hear the doctors telling us and the scientists, if we don't get ahead of this, we are going to see much more of these outbreaks we've had in society with anger and mass shootings. You know, when the kids went back to school after the pandemic, what do? We issued every child during the pandemic a wireless tablet to access their education with not one shred of safety training in this country. Other countries did better, and they taught their families how to use technology safely. When those kids went back to school in Boston, it was on the news in 3 different districts in Boston where the children were literally beating on their classmates with the Chromebook because they had become so dysregulated in their central nervous system that they couldn't control their impulses anymore, and they had a weapon in their hand, literally beating other students with this tool. And I mentioned it to a woman in my yoga class. Turns out she was a guidance counselor at a neighboring high school. She says, oh yeah, one of my colleagues is out on disability because one of the kids beat her up with his Chromebook. So it's happening. And we know that this is a high contributing factor. And the science is all there. Dr. Paul did another published study in the Journal of Chemical Neuroanatomy. Microwave frequency electromagnetic fields produce widespread neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. So we have everything we need to teach those around us about this. And in a moment, we'll start getting to the solutions. So it's not just you and I, it's every biological cell on the planet is impacted on this. And when we talk about, you know, we've got our own navigation systems built into our bodies, so do the birds and the bees and the trees and everything else. They've got their warning systems. And our friends at the Environmental Health Trust recently launched a new beautiful website called Wildlife, Wireless, and the Environment, where you find all the science and what the solutions need to be. But for our pollinators and our birds, they have magnetite and other components to their beaks and their brains that keep them synchronized to the Earth's natural electromagnetic field. There's a wonderful scientist by the name of Schumann, and he figured out how often the Earth pulses its electromagnetic field and determined it happens 7.83 times a second. So that's called Schumann's resonance. And that's what every living thing on the planet is meant to be connected to. That helps to keep our own electrical circuitry fine-tuned. 7.83 times a second, or 7.83 hertz. That's the cycles per second in hertz. When we got so fancy with wireless tech, we did the more the merrier, right? So we started putting out signals in the megahertz range and then in the gigahertz range. Well, mega means 1 million times per second. We're getting this jackhammering of microwaves. Gigahertz means 1 billion times per second. We are getting trounced by microwaves. And we're supposed to be at 7.83. And we wonder why the birds and the bees can't get back to their hives and their nests, because we put this huge layer of electropollution between them and the Earth, and they're getting dysregulated. Or these bombardments are just taking them out outright, like in the Hague in the Netherlands, when they piloted 5G, there were reports of hundreds of birds literally dropping from the sky, either stunned or outright clocked by the microwaves. So we know, and we have a very robust body of science showing us the harm. Those concerned with climate change, back as far as 2012, a Greenpeace analyst did a report that showed if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world in 2012. And look how much more has been pushed on us in the last 12 years. So again, our message is not no technology, it's safe technology. And we're here to tell you how to do that. But every time we use technology, we need to think about the energy consumption and the horrific atrocities that are happening down in the Congo and elsewhere to get dozens of minerals that go into every single one of our devices. So if we knew really the human toll and the environmental toll, we would never just go buy the bright, shiny new object because the industry told us what a hot deal it is. We would use everything to its full useful life cycle and then make sure we're recycling at the end of that life cycle. So all these data warehouses, the wireless networks, all of our personal devices, streaming consumes huge amounts of energy. So don't sit there on your device watching something while it's streaming. Download it, preferably through a hardwired connection. And again, we talked about earlier, all you have to do is plug Ethernet cables in and get little adapters to plug into your devices, then go in and turn off all the antennas. You've got perfectly safe, fast, reliable technology that consumes 10 times less energy. So streaming consumes huge amounts of energy. Every time we send and receive, every time we charge and recharge and recharge and recharge all of our devices, we're consuming energy. And then we've been talked into all these cool apps, and we've got them all over our devices that honestly, we really don't use very often. Get rid of all of those, because otherwise they're continuously doing updates in the background all the time. So again, the message is not no technology, it's safe technology. And we're going to teach you how to do that. But one of my missing puzzle pieces was, okay, if little me can go out there and get my hands easily on all of this science, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. So that puzzle piece came to light in 2015 when Harvard Law School Center for Ethics put out this incredible free online 59-page report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. Notice the graphic they put on the cover of this report. It's a revolving door. And that's what our federal agencies, by and large, have become, is mouthpieces for industry to set up laws that benefit profitability and not public health. So I went, oh, there is no cavalry coming. There is no silver bullet. We have got to do the local work and inform ourselves and our loved ones and our neighbors and our towns and address this from the bottom up while we're educating at the top down. So so that was in 2015. More recently, ProPublica and others, the Epoch Times has put out a lot of good articles on this, but outing the FCC for being a captured agency. The FDA is another captured agency. That $30 million study that our government did that showed clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage should have triggered public policy. Well, all the people who were at the helm 20 years ago when that study was first commissioned, by the time they did their reporting out 20 years later, we had different people heading up the Food and Drug Administration that commissioned that study. Today, it's Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. And when we look into his background, he should have gone and put public policy in place to protect you and I. Instead, he went over to his friends at the FCC and said, we don't really believe that study. Let's just keep with the 1996 public radiation exposure limits that we've always had. We don't need to change a thing. Folks, can I ask you to please mute? We're getting a little bit of feedback from somebody's line. Thank you. So when we look at Dr. Jeffrey Shuren's background, we see that he is married to a woman who is a partner in a law firm that represents, guess who? Big Wi-Fi, big telecom, and a lot of the other big industries that are environmental polluters. And sadly, this corruption goes all the way up to the World Health Organization. I've been in the room when people are fact checking me and they'll say, oh, look, the World Health Organization says, we don't know, it's fine, let's keep doing what we're doing. But how would you know when you do a cursory search, because the current information doesn't show up at the top of the search? How would you know that there's two groups at the World Health Organization tasked with addressing man-made radiation? One is a group of highly qualified scientists doing their jobs, and the other is a group that's heavily funded by industry and has conflicts of interest all over it. You wouldn't know. All you'll see is the conflict of interest reports that are saying, let's keep doing what we're doing. We need more science. So because of the animal studies that were done by the National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute, we now have enough evidence of harm to reclassify this as a group 1 known human carcinogen. So the World Health Organization has an open investigation going on right now that they're going to drag out for years. And it looks like the industry has gotten hold of that. But they are saying that they're going to account for what's happening to children, what's happening to the elderly, who are especially vulnerable because as we age, our biology starts to slowly break down. And this is a huge added burden that exacerbates that decline. They want to know why the FCC and our guidelines are not protecting our environment and those with electromagnetic illness and what it's doing to fertility issues. So on paper, it looks good, but we think it's gotten hijacked again. But you'd be hard pressed to even pull this up to show people, hey, look, the World Health Organization is actually looking at this again. But if you go to this link, you'll be able to get to these credible sources. So that's all the bad news. Let's spend the next few minutes talking about the good news and what you and I do have control over with. And then we'll spend the last few minutes and wrap up around 8 o'clock Eastern time, 6 p.m. Mountain time, 5 p.m. over in California and the likes. But we'll give you some time to ask questions at the end. But this is what I did in my house, and this is what you can do in your house. If you go over and take a peek at your router, your modem router, you'll see that it's got Ethernet ports in it, right? So this is hooked up to a big cable that comes in off the street that gives you the signal. You can take an Ethernet cable and plug it into one of these ports and then run it to wherever you use the technology in your house, like we used to do. And I was psyched because when I figured this out, there was a box of Ethernet cables in my basement that we had stopped using years ago. So I just pulled out that box of Ethernet cables and kind of went to town on my house. So most of us have more than one device we would like to hardwire, and we're very lucky. Solution solved. Ethernet switch, it's like an extension box for electronics. So you can get an Ethernet switch, get a main cable to go right to one of the ports in here, and now you've got a direct connection to the internet. And if you're going to go out and buy new cables, we recommend that you look for something that says it's shielded. You'll just pay a small dollar upgrade on that. And the shielding just means that inside the plastic encasement, there's a foil liner around the actual wires, because every wire is going to have the possibility of throwing electric and magnetic fields into your living space through the wall about 6 feet or 8 feet into your living space. And if there's a foil liner around those wires, that will add another layer of security so you don't get that man-made exposure. So shielded Ethernet cables if you can, into a switch box, and then just get shorter cables for each one of your devices. And again, get shielded if you can. And then, who knew, but there are these little adapters that you can just plug into an Ethernet cable, and then on the other end, plug into your device. And this is the lightning adapter that I got for the iPhone. So you just plug it into the iPhone, or for like the MacBook, you look for the Thunderbolt adapter. And same thing for any of the tablets. Just look up the make and model of whatever device you have, and then look around and see what adapters work for that. So running the Ethernet cables is the first step. The second step is, now that you're hardwired, you need to go into every device, from the router to the phone to the tablets to everything, and just go into your settings and locate all those different antennas and turn each one of them off. And with the Internet of Things, they seem to be putting multiple antennas in just about everything that we buy. So it really behooves us to have a meter in hand. And for those who joined late, in the earlier part of the recording that you'll get, you'll see how some people buy them outright. Others may go in with loved ones or neighbors or colleagues, or you might get one at work. Or you might ask your library to put one into circulation, and we gave some tips for doing that too. But it's critical to measure, because once you turn off the antennas you think you know about, there might be others. Like, I was sitting here one day on a Monday morning, and my daughter had been home, and she was teaching swim lessons in our backyard, and said, "Mom, I need to print my swim schedule. Can I just turn the Wi-Fi on real quick?" And I said, "Yeah, go ahead, but just turn it right off when you're done." And she printed out her swim schedule. So I come into work on Monday morning, and I'm feeling like the earth is sucking me down again. And I'm going, why do I feel like this? I slept fine last night. I ate a clean organic breakfast, but I recognize this feeling. So I pulled out my meter and it flew into the red zone. So I start scanning my room, and sure enough, it blew up right on my printer. Now my printer has a little icon that glows that says Wi-Fi, and it wasn't glowing, but it's sending the radiation out. And I was like, what the heck? So I just went online and I looked up my make and model and got the manual. And unbeknownst to me, there were 3 antennas in that one printer, and only one of them controlled that little glow panel on the front of my printer. So I just had to go into settings and find that Bluetooth antenna and find that other antenna that was in there and go off, off, and then measure again. And I got back into radio silence. So these are sneaky little antennas. Our new stove came in with an antenna. I had to call the repair guy to come in and just literally take off the back of my stove, which was transmitting at 1,090,000 microwatts per square meter. And the manual said, stay, was it like 20 centimeters away from this device? And I'm like, how the heck am I supposed to cook from the middle of my kitchen? I need to be right there on top of my stove. So it's just ridiculous. But the tech came in, pulled off the back of my stove, and behind the digital display is the motherboard. And we just saw right next to the motherboard was this little tiny board that was the antenna. We just unplugged it. Measured again, I was back down under 10 microwatts per square meter in my home, down from 1,090,000. My television came in, and there was nothing in the controls that I could turn off the antenna. So I picked up the big TV and I threw it in my car, and I went down to the local tech guy in my town, and I paid him $80, but he opened that up and knew right where to go in and unplug that antenna from the motherboard. So it can be done, but without a meter, how do you know if you've truly gotten everything? So this is what safe technology looks like in our homes today for the devices we have control over. But there are a few areas that we may or may not have direct control over. And one of these is the utility smart meters. So when I was a little girl, I'm one of 10 kids, and we played a lot of hide and seek outside. And I would be hiding in the bushes, and I just keep myself occupied while I waited to be found. And I would watch the little dials go around on our utility meters for gas, water, electric, whatever. And it turns out those were called analog meters. Those were strictly mechanical meters that went around and around and measured how much of the utility you were using. And then a person would walk the neighborhood, write down your reading, and that's how they did the billing. So those meters lasted for 40 or 50 years, and they did not emit microwave radiation. Then the industry came along with innovation and said to our towns, hey, if your town adopts this new system of smart meters or digital meters, we can save you the cost of paying those walkers to go through the neighborhood, and your signals will go electronically. And then people can get their bills that way, and you guys will save some money. Sounds like a great deal, right? Yeah. So all of our towns started signing up for these digital meters. And then people started getting sick, and there were a lot of other damages coming in. because the industry will say, oh, these just pulse a few seconds a day. Well, we test what the industry says. And I sat down on the floor in my living room, where on the outside wall, we have 2 electric meters, one for our solar system and one for our electric system. And I sat there and I counted and I counted. And in a 24-hour period, when I did the math, I was getting at least 17,000 pulsations of microwaves around the clock. They may say it only adds up to a few seconds, but when you're getting hit all day and all night, that's very, very dangerous. We talked about metal being a way for microwaves to transmit. And so if not installed properly, this radiation can hop on the wires and the pipes of your house and travel all over the metal in your home and basically turn your whole house into a giant radio frequency antenna. And then we've gotten so many reports of these devices not being grounded. And so there are power surges and stuff that are happening that are causing fires and explosions. And one of the things we need to know about an electrical fire is you can't just show up with the fire department and hose that puppy down. You will electrocute the firemen as soon as the water hits that. So the full electrical circuitry has to be disabled before the fire department can do its job. Now that can take up to an hour to get them contacted, get it into their system and get it shut off. And if you've got a windy day going, you can have that fire going everywhere out of control. We've had these deadly fires out in California, and this has been a factor in some of the deadliest. Data harvesting and privacy issues. Your data is flying through the air now with these wireless systems, and any hacker with $100 application out at the curb can intercede that data and know what your patterns are. When are you guys showering? When is your electricity being used? When is it not being used? Oh, okay, you're out of the house between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. They can back up their truck and take all your toys, right? And then the industry has been known to take your data and sell it to third parties who now know what equipment you have, what appliances you have, what your spending patterns are, and now they're going to start selling you their products. And worse, there are perhaps nefarious reasons for people who want to know what they might do to shut down the grid. So it's not smart technology at all. It comes with many, many flaws. And it's a huge environmental justice issue. These toxic industries come into our towns and say, hey, we're going to save you money. We're going to, dump all this funding into your community for these great programs. And then they say, we'll do a pilot here, and hey, everybody, look how great it went here. So now we're going to roll it out all across the street, all across the state. They did that here in Worcester, Massachusetts. They went way over budget. Our attorney general had to get involved because the industry, National Grid, wanted to turn around and slap the ratepayers with their mismanagement and make the ratepayers charge, pay more on their bills. So it's been a big mess, but that doesn't stop industry from saying, hey, New York, hey, Connecticut, hey, Rhode Island, we did this whole smart grid pilot program up in Massachusetts. You guys are way behind the 8 ball. Get on the bandwagon. Let's go. And how do they know that this is a big disaster waiting to happen? So again, education has to come before we can resolve these issues. And we're so grateful when credible experts are able to help get word out, like Jeremy Johnson. He was a Silicon Valley engineer, and he did this incredible 15-minute TED Talk about when he and his medical doctor wife got so sick in a very short period of time, and nothing in her training could help them figure out what was going on. And it turned out a bank of smart meters had gone in at their condo, and they got very, very sick. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight, ironically, is a radiation professional. She is a large animal radiologist, and she uses this technology to work with the animals in her care, and had no idea that the non-ionizing, non-thermal, low-level radio frequency radiation was harmful until a smart meter got mounted on her home. and she started having all these neurotoxic effects. And then something malfunctioned and they had to take it off. And there was a period of a few weeks that it wasn't on her home, and all those symptoms went away miraculously, right? And then they put another meter back on her home, and all of her symptoms came back, to the point where she was driving out in traffic with her daughter in the car, and Dr. McKnight could not remember if that green light meant stop or go. She made a 50-50 guess, and thank goodness she got home safely with her child that day. So this is how neurotoxic it is, and Dr. McKnight did a TED Talk on that too. So we've talked about our own devices that we can control. We've talked about the smart meters. In some communities, you can do an opt-out. Sometimes they'll charge you every month to get the reading. We have legislation in Massachusetts and elsewhere. Vermont has already passed a law where you can get a no-fee opt-out and get an analog meter back so that you're not getting harmed in your home. But again, all this only happens when citizens get involved. So cell towers started out in industrial parks like 300 feet in the air, far away from where we lived and spent time. And then as the industry put more and more product out there, they needed more and more capacity. So they started encroaching and bringing in more and more of these macro big cell tower antennas closer and closer to where we live, where we go to school, where we worship, where we go out and recreate, where we go to our medical facilities. So if you start noticing, you'll see these cell tower antennas mounted on buildings, painted the same color of the building, or just sticking up off the rooftops, literally on top of people. But everybody who mounts them there gets a kickback from industry. So it's a revenue stream. So it's critically important that we look at the non-industry funded science, because the industry will fund their own short-term studies deliberately done under conditions that will show no harm. So it's important to look at the non-industry funded studies. And when we do, we start finding things like we are seeing higher cancer rates. We are seeing higher neurological insomnia, anxiety, depression, pain, headaches, nosebleeds that start coming down at 500 meters from a cell tower. Now, that's where the curve, folks, can you please mute? That's where the harm starts coming down at 500 meters, which is about 1,640 feet. It doesn't actually catch up to normal population statistics until almost double that at like 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet. So we know these things do not belong at close range. And then there's a website here in the US called antennasearch.com, where you can go out and put in any address in the US, and it will give you a return of a 3-mile radius of where these giant macro antennas and cell towers are. And again, these signals go for miles and miles. When you look at something like downtown Boston, where our State House is, I put in their address. There were more than 1,500 cell towers with more than 4,500 of these giant antennas. So the electropollution in our towns, especially our big cities, has gotten just out of control. And this is just one return from one neighborhood in Boston that shows just total saturation of microwave radiation on top of our neighborhoods. And then now we add the 5G small cells. So 5G means 5th generation technology. We mentioned that about every 10 years a new generation comes out. Now we're up to 5G. And our friends at Safer Tech Hawaii did this 5 or 6 minute video that talks a lot about what 5G is and isn't. That's a good one to watch. And what the industry is doing is spinning it up from a marketing standpoint that, oh, you're going to have faster streaming, faster downloads for your entertainment, smart cities, super highways. It all sounds so sexy and great. And then you look and see, so who is buying up the entertainment industry? Who's benefiting from this? It's the same parent companies that own telecom. This is a new revenue stream for them. And it's not like 5G is replacing all these antennas that already exist. Those are the backbone for these new smaller 5G small cell antennas that are now coming in close range, because the bigger antennas in our current devices that are using 4G, that allows the signal to come in from out there in to hook up with your device using a longer wavelength that can penetrate objects like trees and windows. It'll go right through it, and it goes right through our electrical circuitry too. But 5G, all that's left to monetize, all the bandwidth of those longer wavelengths has been maxed out, sold. All that's left are these tiny little millimeter waves. And so what the industry is saying is, hey, we know how to do this. We're going to start putting cell towers in at close range, every 2 to 12 houses inside your neighborhood at our public access way at the curb. They're going to be putting cell towers in right outside our bedroom windows at bedroom height. They're going to be pulsing radiation to connect with 5G devices inside, if they can make it inside, or for everybody walking by on foot traffic or driving by in their cars. That's what 5G is. And at a time when our cities are really trying to concentrate on climate change, and they're planting more trees to create a big canopy to naturally cool our cities in the summertime, industry comes in often under the cover of darkness at night and just lops off the trees so those dinky little 5G millimeter wave signals can get through. So we've got ourselves in quite a mess. And here's the kicker. This little 4-minute clip from our friends at the Environmental Health Trust shows Connecticut U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal at a Congress hearing with the Commerce Committee saying to industry, so please share with us, how much money did you invest to make sure 5G was safe before it came to market? And these two industry guys kind of humming and hawing are ultimately made to say, well, we don't actually know of any non-industry funded peer-reviewed science on this. So Senator Blumenthal says, so as far as health and safety is concerned, we're flying blind here. And that's the bottom line. Bring it to market, ask questions later. And this, so we showed you a map of what Boston looks like with all the macro cell antennas. This is now what the mini cell towers at the curb look like. Look how densified that is. The electro pollution is just out of control. And the folks who report on technology like Computer World say 5G is a bad joke. We're not actually getting any faster signals than we already had with existing 4G technology. So our own devices, the smart meters, the cell towers, and the 5G small cell antennas, and now we have the satellites beaconing from above us, are creating so much electro pollution. And by and large, our governments in our country certainly are not monitoring the cumulative exposure. So Dr. Magda Havas, who is the co-chair of the EMF Medical Conference, she's a professor emeritus from Trent University in Canada. That means she retired with distinction. She taught electromagnetic fields for 25 years. She has a project now in her retirement called the Global EMF Monitoring Project, or what she nicknamed her brag project. Can you brag about the radiation limits in your area? So she has us as citizen scientists. Anybody who gets the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter can follow the protocols that she'll give you, with a little sheet of paper. You go out into your community with a clipboard and a buddy, maybe a friend, or maybe somebody who works for the town who would be interested in learning about this. Go out as a team, and one of you does these measurements that she has you do, and the other one writes it down on the clipboard, and then you enter into her database. And then you'll get a point on her map from around the world to show, are you in the green, the yellow, the red, or the black? And and here's the website, globalemf.net. And again, for those who joined us late, everybody who registered will get a recording of today's presentation plus these slides, so you can go in and explore whatever you want that we've teed up for you, and certainly do your own investigation. But you can be a citizen scientist and help. So in the scientific literature, many years ago, the scientists got together and said, look, if you have a clean environment where your body can detox, on its own, even if we got it down to 1,000 microwatts per square meter outdoors, we might be able to do okay. So we want to be at 1,000 or less outdoors. We'll give you some examples when we were working with New Hampshire. Somebody measured their local fire department in the green. Somebody went down into Keene, New Hampshire. And since they got this yellow reading, we understand that they have installed 5G small cell antennas. So we anticipate this has gone much higher. Nashua was already red. Concord at their capital was already in the red zone. And these measurements were taken during the pandemic where there was very few people out doing foot traffic or drive-by traffic. So this was just the natural ambient environment out there. And we did the same thing in Stratham, New Hampshire, where there was a cell tower right on their main drag. And here at the North End in Boston, for anybody who's been a tourist here, these are the incredible Italian restaurants and bakeries. And right above the storefronts, we have living quarters, so apartments and condos right above. And here on the main drag of Hanover Street, industry put in these pretty wrought iron lamps. Well, these are actually 5G small cell antennas, literally outside people's bedroom windows. And then when you go down Hanover Street and you look at the crossroads and you look down there, did they put the even pleasant looking ones up? No, they put these ugly gray monopoles with 5G antennas right outside
Yeah,
people's.
it closes off.
Okay, can I ask you to please mute? Thank you. So let's spend the next couple of minutes going through the good news, and we're going to leave you with a bunch of resources that you can explore. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us when we finally get to make meaningful change in our society, it comes through 3 different channels. First, the public tunes in, and that's what we're hoping to inspire tonight. We start doing our job in the civics area and raise these issues with our towns and get large groups of people informed, and then we can impact what happens. It goes through the courts, and we've got a lot of court cases going on right now. And then ultimately public policy catches up and we have something that forces the industry to change. So please know there are a lot of really important lawsuits happening all over the country right now. And one where the FCC was proven guilty of ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm, and the courts ordered them to bring their public radiation exposure limits in line with the science. But they didn't give them a deadline. In August, it'll be 3 years, and the FCC has done nothing. So there is no cavalry coming. We're working it at all those levels, but if you want to protect your town, you have to step up and get everybody around you educated and start talking about this and not back down until it's fixed. So lots of lawsuits you can look at that are groundbreaking. Same with policy. I mentioned early on that we had a legislator and a citizen in New Hampshire who figured this out, came down to my home in Massachusetts, and we helped the legislator to connect the dots. And he wrote a really important bill saying, why do Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re and others already recognize this as a world-leading risk? And they put exclusions in their policy. So industry is not covered legally on this. So who assumes that legal liability? Our towns, our schools? This is a huge red flag. We talked about the legal fine print at the beginning of our talk today. Why is the FCC ignoring thousands of studies? And why are they only talking about the heat effects, when the science is showing you don't have to have heat to have harm? Why do we allow 100 times more radiation than other countries? And why is nobody looking at all these different signals coming at us from so many devices and infrastructure antennas at once? So we're ignoring that cumulative effect. So by some miracle and through the hard work of experts who came to testify, we got a bill passed into law in 7 months in New Hampshire. They spent a year, even during the pandemic, bringing in world-leading experts and investigating this and proving that there's not just fringe science out there. These are not just cherry-picked studies. There are literally thousands of studies, peer-reviewed in highly regarded journals, showing harm. And so they came out with this groundbreaking report that's here. And Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire's Department of Computer and Electrical Engineering served on that commission, and he has been a lifer on medical instrumentation as an engineer and thought, gee, this is going to be a slam dunk to sit on this commission. Of course, Wi-Fi is fine. We've been building medical devices for 30 years. And then he got in and looked at the science, and he's done a complete 180. And now he has just taken over as president of the Environmental Health Trust. And he is furthering out the work that this commission has done. So lots of excellent resources. So long story short, once their commission did their work, they made 15 recommendations on what we should be doing in our world. And now we need separate laws for all of those recommendations. And every time they try to tee one up, doesn't industry get in there with their deep pockets, their disinformation campaigns, and their political pull for the economy? And we have not been able to get any of these recommended bills passed yet. Every day is a new day, so we don't stop trying, but we have bills all over the country to address this. We still have 2 bills alive here in Massachusetts today. Our session will be wrapping up by and large by the end of this month. So we're doing a push for our smart meter bill and our commission bill. And we would love to see the schools start protecting the kids, because our Department of Education is waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So lots of great bills to inspire your own legislators to work on. And then when industry rolls into your town and says, oh, hey, we're going to give you some money to put these cell towers in the public access way. And those people who complain about anything, those are just the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people who just don't want it near them. Ignore them. Well, it's not true. Those aren't just a few people. If you go to Americans for Responsible Technology or Children's Health Defense, you will see that there are more than 150 groups all over the country already working on this. And you may be able to join up with people who are already there, or they have a toolkit for you to start a group of your own. But look at all these examples of towns that have looked at this and done something successfully. So you can peek into those more on your own time. Again, we have toolkits for you to get you started with checklists to bring to your town. Does our zoning code account for all this stuff? If not, let's get it done. Let's hire an attorney who knows this stuff. And we'll recommend people you can contact. But look at these towns. Once they got informed and talked to the experts, they are making meaningful changes in their communities. But it doesn't happen until you and I get out there and start doing our civic duty. So lots of good news for our schools too, but most of our schools have only been told by industry that you have to have this technology. They've sunk a lot of money into it, and they're scared to be the first to make meaningful change. So we have to start educating our schools and show them. Silicon Valley executives send their kids to school with no technology. They know this is harming our kids. Finland, the Netherlands, and others are taking tech out of the classroom because it's such a distraction. A lot of districts in the US now are coming up with bans that are going to be implemented because the cell phones and the wearables and the tablets are such a distraction. This is the perfect opportunity to teach them to use what technology they keep safely. So we have toolkits with Tech Safe Schools to do that. We have curriculum already developed with the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition, kindergarten through grade 12. Dr. McKnight and I did 4 professional development sessions with her children's schools in Pennsylvania. Bring us in. We're here to help. My little nonprofit already has an online course to, in a half an hour, train the entire school district, train your workforce, train your municipality. Everything we need already exists. And the Environmental Health Trust has so many postcards and fact sheets in multiple languages. So much great stuff going on that we can jump from. Medical solutions. We have the EMF Medical Conference, free and online. The first medical school textbook has now been published. We have a nursing textbook with a chapter on this. And for all of our engineers and stuff, we have so many resources, all here for you to explore. And then things that we can do at home to bring the conversation to our loved ones. Some of us are do-it-ourselfers. We can, figure out how to plug in wires and cables. Others, it's terrifying and they just want to hire somebody. There's an entire profession of building biologists that you can find a consultant who can help you. And then just keep educating ourselves. Sit down with your loved ones. Who knew? PBS already has 2 half-hour episodes on this. This award-winning film, Generation Zapped, is available through the library streaming services of Canopy and Hoopla. You can get it online. Sit down and watch that with your loved ones. I can be brought in to educate what's happened since that film came out in 2018. Let's bring it up to date. And then our friends at Americans for Responsible Tech have a whole toolkit for you to use. So the goal is to get to as low as reasonably achievable. That's called the ALARA principle. It's already used by the Centers for Disease Control, where ionizing radiation is concerned, like the X-rays and the gamma rays and the sun and all of that. Well, we need to apply the ALARA principle now to the man-made radiation, the non-ionizing. So our goal is to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And we've got great resources for municipal leaders here, and we need to just emphasize it's not the government guidelines we need to go by, because they were never safety tested and they're very harmful. It's the biological limits, and we know what those are, and we can get you to those. So all of this is teed up. We can't kid ourselves. There's no safe level of man-made radiation, so we've got to do the reduction strategies. And as the former head of our government's, National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences says, yeah, we have some captured agencies, but we also have some really good people still at the federal level. But it's going to take us at the local and state level to empower them to do their jobs. They are not going to just take the reins and run with it. Industry is too penetrated there. So let's educate. We will be doing these education forums every month. We've been brought in, I can be brought in to do municipal presentations. We can do regional presentations. We've had many multi-town presentations with the city councils and select boards. So start where you are. Are you in a profession where they're looking for public speakers at their quarterly or annual meetings? Speaking to people, educating is my happy place, and we can certainly connect you with other experts in medicine and in science who do this too. So here's some ideas for what we can do locally. Now that tech is here to stay, we need to start having tech safety committees like Burlington, Massachusetts has already done. We need to underscore to our towns that if you let industry in, you've got to offer opt-outs so people who don't want this technology, who are already sick from it, can stay safely in their homes. And we need to start creating hardwired public spaces. And then make sure we get our bylaws updated on communication facilities. And don't be shy about bringing in an expert attorney, somebody like Andrew Campanelli, who used to work for industry, knows their playbook inside out, knows all the federal laws, knows how to look at your local and state laws, and help your town to develop a more powerful zoning code that will hold up under current law. The industry comes in and says, here's an application. If you deny it, we're going to sue you. Well, I'll tell you what, if you get your zoning code up to speed, they can't sue you and win, but they intimidate the heck out of our unwitting public servants who are like, oh, we don't want to get sued. Here, we'll sign that application. And they just pretty much put a sentence of harm in your community. So for today, what can you do to reduce your exposures? Start looking. Start noticing your habits. What are you touching? What's in your home that's radiating? And then start with baby steps, because we know this is like water from a fire hose when you first learn, but you do have a lot of control over this. So start with baby steps. Maybe the first thing you do is keep everything in airplane mode when you're not using it and create a sleep sanctuary. Give your body that rest. It's not just the blue light. It's the actual microwaves from all the antennas in all the devices all over your home. and then make your way to transitioning device by device to Ethernet cables and adapters. And again, you be the boss of your technology. Off should be your default, and then only turn on the one antenna that you need to make your transaction, and then turn it off as quick as you can. And then look at these beautiful resources that are here to help you. These 1 or 2 page fact sheets. They've got postcards at the Environmental Health Trust. So we thank you for joining us. Last month, we co-hosted with Idahoans for Safe Technology. And I left this up today because they've got a really good website that shows you in real time what they've been doing, where they've stopped cell towers in their town. So go listen to the tricks and the trade that they did there. And then you can find me at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And we can put you in touch with our hosts who are with us from New Mexico tonight. So I will go ahead and stop my screen share now. And I will ask Kevin if we have had any questions that we might answer in the chat.
We did. Thanks so much, Cece. That was great. When you were talking about the iPhone, I went ahead and showed what the Samsung phone needs to do, right? So if you're looking for the legal information, I put it in the chat box. And then looks like Melissa had a few questions. One was about checking where 5G is. So there's a new safe and sound meter, and that actually will measure 5G. And then she was asking if it's true that you can see trees that are dying from 5G. I can tell you at our house, even before 5G, we have 4G or had 4G. We have a guest home, and all of the bushes that were around that guest home were dying. We got rid of that modem and went to a wired modem and Ethernet, and all of the bushes now around that house, that building, are all in great shape. So they're flourishing. So it's not just 5G that can kill trees and plants, but 4G as well. I don't know about 3, but certainly the 4G.
Yeah, it is. It's when the World Health Organization in 2011 classified radio frequency as a possible human carcinogen, they were very careful to spell out that it's not any one particular signal. All of these man-made signals are classified the same way. So it doesn't matter where it's coming from. It's all of this man-made radiation. So thank you,
Sure.
Kevin.
You bet. Her other question was, do you recommend clothing to shield us at school and work? I know from Arlene being affected by it, if you're affected by these types of signals, then getting that clothing is probably important. If you don't have a lot of effect from it, it's very expensive clothing. But if you want to be safer, you can certainly do that. It's your choice. But if you're affected, invest in it. If you're concerned, you can certainly make that investment. So
Good deal.
and many brands. There are many brands. I don't know, Cece, if you have a specific
Yeah,
brand that you
I don't
recommend.
know about brands, but I do know there are some trusted websites that you might start with. Shield Your Body. Shield Your Body is one. For meters and stuff, they have Safe Living Technologies is who puts out the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter that we recommend. And they also have shielding fabrics and other like sleep canopies that you can create a Faraday cage for yourself. It's actually really pretty. It's like, Nights of Arabia. It looks like gauze, and I actually sleep in a sleep canopy myself. And then there's also a company called Less EMF, lessemf.com, and they have a lot of products that you can look at too. And then there's another one called, I think it's Tech Wellness with August Bryce, and they have some products out there. She's electrically sensitive too. So all these folks have really good customer service, and they'll be happy to answer your specifics.
Sure. One thing I was going to comment on is we have an automobile that Arlene uses, and we actually took that in and had an RF shielding material put on every single one of the windows. And it's totally transparent. It's actually even on the windshield itself, but every window in that vehicle is covered. And when we did that, it literally reduced the order by 2 orders of magnitude, the RF signals that would come through the windows in the vehicle. So that was something that we did specifically for Arlene. And then Rosemary asked about taking smart meters off. and going to the old analog, yes, they many times they will want to charge you. And that's why Cece was talking about there should be an opt-out program. So we did that at our house. We ended up having one of our meters removed after we found out that they had put a digital in place of the analog. We've now gone back to the analog. I read that meter monthly and then mail it in. So there
Excellent.
are options for you.
Excellent. So I noticed that we are honored to have with us one of the building biologists, Eric Windheim, and he's out in California, and he's also one of the instructors with the Building Biology Institute, I believe. Eric, do you want to join us and chime in? I see somebody was asking about living in an apartment complex where they've installed smart meters. Do you have any insights that you might like to unmute and share? Hmm. He may be multitasking right now. Eric, are you able to join us in conversation? Maybe not. It looks like he's shaking his head. Kevin, do you want to weigh in on what folks can do?
If you're living in an apartment building and they've installed smart meters, even if you opted out of your own, you still have all of those other smart meters there. I mean, I hate to say it, one of your best options would be to move. I don't know how else to say it, but you don't want to necessarily put yourself there, especially if you're close to the panel where the smart meters are. You want to get as far away from them as possible if you need to still continue living there.
Right. And measuring is also critically important, so that you know what you're dealing with, right? And there are electric meters, magnetic meters, electromagnetic meters, and radio frequency meters. And a good building biologist can help walk you through that. So maybe you're lucky, maybe you're in a far corner, far away from where those things are. Maybe they haven't thrown dirty electricity all over the wiring. So maybe before you move, try and see and measure just exactly what's going on. But if you're already feeling it, I would have to agree with Kevin that moving is probably really important.
Yeah, some of the other options might be to paint, right? So there is an electromagnetic paint, a resistant paint, very expensive. It's roughly $300 to $400 per gallon. But if moving is not an option for you, that might be one thing you can do. So again, use your meters. You might have to put filters in if you have dirty electricity, but you can do a lot to clean that up. You can get rid of your Wi-Fi and go to wired internet, Ethernet. So those are some things you can do if moving is just not an option, but the painting is not inexpensive, but it is helpful.
Right.
So
And Kevin's an engineer, so he understands a lot of this. He's got the capacity to figure out how to do all this. But for the average Joe, you need to be really careful with shielding because there are right ways and wrong ways to do it. And I'll give you an example. There was a woman in the next town to me whose health started really crashing. And it took her a long time. She couldn't stay in her condo. She was couch surfing. And somebody finally helped her realize that it was this bank of 7 smart meters that got mounted outside of her kitchen wall that was taking her down. And she learned about that shielding paint called carbon black. And so she painted that whole wall of her condo with carbon black and then put a pretty color on top of it. She didn't know enough that her neighbors on the other side of the condo, not the side where the wall was, but the other side of the condo, they had the decked cordless phone, they had their router, they had their computers, their laptops, all of that. And those signals go through everything. So they were going through the common wall, hitting that metal wall in her place now, bouncing back and giving her a double whammy. So we really encourage you to work with a professional if you're going to do any kind of shielding like that. And the other consideration is that if you move and somebody else moves into that space and doesn't know, you could be putting them in a very dangerous zone. So if they're in there with all their wireless stuff. So lots of considerations around that. But again, the solutions exist, but you need to be wise and deal with a professional. Eric, I see you've been able to unmute yourself. Would you like to join us for a couple of minutes?
Sure, yeah, I just tuned in and I saw you tirelessly telling people how to avoid pain and suffering.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I find out that most people aren't concerned until they do start suffering, and then they want a solution and fast.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's sad. They're
So,
pretty well addicted and indoctrinated that these things are safe, like you've been pointing out. We've all been deceived, you know?
yeah, yeah. And it's unconscionable because it's fixable on many levels, right? So, Eric, describe for us what a building biologist does.
Okay, so everybody has a medical doctor. And you go and you get a checkup, and if he sees something wrong, he tells you how to avoid it or fix it or whatever. Normally through surgery, chemo, pharmaceuticals, radiation. But they never go to your house. They never check out what's going on at home. So building biology started in Germany and came to the United States after World War II. It came to United States in 1987. And they train people to be house biologists or house doctors to see if the house is safe. Uh, we're based in science. We use nature as our model, and nature is our gold standard. So we use precision instrumentation, like the one that you are holding up, the Safe and Sound Pro 2. That's a really great, hard to beat that. It's so much better than everything else. We measure electric fields, magnetic fields, wireless radiation, dirty electricity, and then we categorize it either no, slight, severe, or extreme. And here's a picture of a report I just did for somebody, and they called in and I had to review it. That's why I had to break away. But we use
Uh,
color coding. Green is no concern, magenta is extreme. So then we say, well, okay, so this is no concern, that's severe, that's slight concern, and this is 6.5x extreme. So then what are the solutions? Okay, so we know what the effective solutions are. I see people spending money in all directions on stuff that it's a good product, but it's not the right product for them, or maybe it's a hocus pocus kind of high-tech rabbit foot, a crystal, a gem, or some sort of so-called harmonizer. But we say it's very simple. Here are the solutions. They start off with remove the offending device and replace it with something less toxic. Let me switch to the other screen so I'm looking at you. Okay, so your Wi-Fi router. Okay, remove it. Move to Ethernet. It's faster, it uses less electricity, there's no radiation, and it's private, okay? And they go, oh, wow, that means I gotta hire somebody to wire the house. Yeah, but you see, in your house, you already got all the wires built in. You've got what's called a communication cabinet. That costs 5 or 6 grand. Somebody already spent the money to run these wires. Look right there. There's an Ethernet connection in each and every room. So look, I have a network specialist. He can come out here and get all this working so you can have Ethernet in every room, including the kitchen counter, phone line in every room, wherever you want. And then you don't need any Wi-Fi. Okay, so that's remove, replace, reposition, reduce usage, um, then repair if there's wiring code violations and magnetic fields as a result. Those have to be repaired. So I have an EMF electrician. We go back and repair those. And many times people feel better before I leave the house. Like I just turn off the Wi-Fi and they go, oh, wow, the pressure in my head just stopped. Or we turn off their Tesla power wall. That's pretty popular. Oh man, those things are really toxic. Um, and sometimes a child will come out of the back bedroom and say, Daddy, the pressure in my head just stopped. And suddenly the husband, who's been like this the whole time and obviously doesn't even want me there, he suddenly says, okay, Eric, I'm sorry I've been so hard on you. What do we do to solve this on a permanent basis? So he makes 180 degrees from being hostile to saying, help me, help me. So that's what we do. And unfortunately, the only people we can help are the ones that want help. And about 85%, they hurt at home. They feel better when they leave and they hurt when they get back home. They may feel good at a friend's house or their mom's house, but their house, there's something about it that headache, fatigue, insomnia, depression. So we say, okay, and I write them down. I actually have a little intake form where I have them circle the symptoms they have. I said, we're writing these down so we can use it as a baseline to see what goes away by the end of the day or within a couple days or a week. And then the best thing we do is create a sleep sanctuary. So Adam and Eve had a sleep sanctuary. There's no EMF. Abraham Lincoln had a sleep sanctuary. There's no EMF. Once Edison started distributing electricity everywhere, Sam Milham documented that lifespan went down 8 years in every metro area, except on the farms until after World War II, when we electrified the farms, and then the lifespan went down 8 years. And today, only the Amish haven't had that 8-year drop. And of course, we know they do not use electricity. So if we can find out which circuits are correlated to the electric field on the bed, and we use a specific 3-dimensional electric field meter, we'll say, okay, it's this one, this one, this one, and this one. And the client says, wait a minute, there's only 2 breakers, one for the lights and one for the plugs. Right. But there's wires going by this room on the way to other rooms that are radiating your bed, and we have to turn them off also. So it's a total of 4 for this one little bedroom. Okay, whatever. So we mark them with tape and say, come out here before bedtime, turn them off. And quite often by the next day, they're saying, man, I'm getting the best sleep I've ever had in years. Or I'm having dreams, and they're color dreams, and I never have dreams. Or I woke up and it was still dark and I felt like toast that would come out of the toaster. I'm done. I don't need any more sleep. So at that point, they become believers, and then they tell their friends about it. And some of them will hire me again, and a lot of them go, ha, I don't need that. So their message is falling on deaf ears, even though they have experienced the relief. And Cece, you deal with that all the time. You're just hoping there's one out of 100 that's going to start coming your way.
Yeah, I say if we can plant one seed every day, it's a good day. If we get big wins, we'll pop the champagne. But yeah, it's an uphill battle all the time. But when you actually have people come back and say, I did this and I did that, and yeah, it's better and it worked, then it makes it all worthwhile. We haven't won the big battle yet, but we keep trying. And so we invite everybody to come back with us as often as you want. We have a lot of return folks register with us because they'll go home and find the courage to do one thing and then come back and learn a little bit more. So come back as often as you want. We're going to be holding our next webinar on July 31st at 1 p.m. Eastern. I think it's 1 p.m. Is that right? Yeah, from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern, and everybody's more than welcome to come back. We thank everybody for staying with us this long. We went a little bit over our 2-hour intention, but when I saw Eric here, I just think it's always such a gift for him to pop in with us and share the incredible work that they do. And again, you can find building biologists at the Building Biology Institute website. And if there's not one in your area, there are many who will do teleconsults and make sure they get the equipment in your hands that you'll need. So anything else, Eric, you'd like to add before we
Sure.
wrap up
Yeah.
here?
Okay. So personally, I'd rather be on site and see the house in front of me rather than try to tell somebody how to use a meter, because I've seen them, they could have the right meter, but they could be walking right by a really big problem and they didn't tell me. Okay. Plus, most of these people are using cell phones, so it's hard to hear them clearly.
Yeah,
If
I
you're
know.
looking for building,
If anybody's looking for a new career, we need so many more building biologists.
yeah,
We
there's easier ways to make money. Like I could be selling cell tower siding contracts and getting
Oh.
really wealthy on that.
Yeah, none of us do this work for the money.
So I've done 4 flyout jobs so far this year, and they said, yeah, okay, I want you to come out. Okay, so for them, it's really important.
Yeah.
A retired school teacher, a guy that builds resort hotels, a woman that put in solar with battery backup that was killing them, and then just a mom with a child. And they weren't feeling good in their home. But
Mhm.
you want an on-site assessment? The page in the building biology website is called Find an Expert. I suggest you interview several of them, ask them about their experience.
Mhm.
In fact, there's one right in your area. He knows you. What is his
Are
name?
you thinking of Alistair Mraz or Ken Gardner?
Ken Gardner. Okay. He is extremely detailed oriented,
Mhm.
and he would be an excellent person if you can find somebody down in his area. He has a very sensitive uh, fiance or
Partner.
girlfriend,
Mhm.
and he can't be too far away, but he is excellent at detail.
He is, and he has testified with us time and again on the bills that we've got here, and he's helped so many people in our area. So yeah. So folks are welcome to reach out to me. Email is best. I know that one of our guests today already has an email into me to see if we can set up a time to talk, and I will get back to you tomorrow, Doreen. I just had a really busy week. But I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and Kevin and Arlene, thank you for sharing your experiences with us and all of your insights. And again, we have that half-hour episode that we just did, and that was in my announcement today for this webinar. So feel free to watch that. Eric, always a pleasure to have you with us.
I'm just glad I tuned in. I said, oh, hey, look, what they got it going on. I'm going to join on in.
Yeah, well, we're so grateful every time you do because we love to learn from the hands-on and what we can do for solutions. So keep hope, everybody. Keep educating everybody around you and keep jumping on the bandwagon so that we can all work towards safe technology. All right, Kevin, any closing thoughts from you as well?
No, but I'll borrow a term that Arlene used in our last talk. If your body is telling you something, listen to your body. If you're having a hard time sleeping, if you have an upset stomach, if you have ringing in the ears, don't ignore it and think it's something else. Listen to your body and start to investigate what is potentially causing that, because you don't want to get to the point where you've exceeded your toxic burden limit, because then it's really hard to recover. If you change before it gets that bad, you don't have to go through all that Arlene and I have gone through. So definitely recommend that you listen to your body, take care of it now, don't wait.
This
I
is
do
Arlene. I agree. Thank you, honey.
You bet.
I do have one final solution I can tell people to it's a one size fits all solution for any source of EMF that's in your home. Find out which circuit breaker controls your refrigerator and your heater or your air conditioner, and turn all the other circuit breakers off for a day. And that way you'll find out if it's something electrical in your home, like your Wi-Fi or this or that, or the variable speed pool pump or the energy efficient air conditioner. Turn everything off except the refrigerator for 24 hours and see how you feel. And people go, that sounded crazy, but it made a believer out of my husband. And now we want you to come out here because we got to have more on than just the refrigerator. So can you help us find out what the problem is? But you get rid of everything electrical, and if you improve, the problem's in your house.
Very true.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
we have an oven. It's a double oven, and the amount of energy coming off of that, even when it's not being used, just the electric panel, and then smart connections, that was horrible. Just turning that one breaker off made a huge difference in the kitchen alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you guys are the best. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and everything that we can do. Some days get pretty dark. Let's keep focusing on what we can do, folks, and come back time and again. Reach out if we can help in your communities, and have a tech safe night.
All right.
We'll see you
Thank you,
next
Cece.
time. Bye,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thank you.